Hello, fellow fight fans, and welcome to the Untitled Fightcast number 005. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. If you watched the Super Bowl, cool. I don't particularly care. Here we talk about fighting, warriors, and the culture around it all. So, with that in mind, and UFC 247 coming up this weekend, which is arguably much more exciting, I wanted to take the time to talk about the guy who most everyone would consider to be the best pound-for-pound fighter of all time, who will be defending his belt again on Saturday. You know him, you may or may not love him, but he is Jonny Bones Jones. So wrap up, lock in, and let's get it started. So, what makes Jon Jones so special? I believe it's a handful of things, a couple of which he brought with him the very first time he stepped into the octagon. One of the things he's actually most well known for is his long-ass arms. With a reach of 84.5 inches, I'm 99% sure it's the longest in the UFC. But it's one thing to have reach, and it's a totally different thing to use it, which he did pretty well in his first fight and has only gotten better at it. But the second thing that he had when he stepped into the octagon the first time was his athleticism. Both just his genetics, because his whole family is full of athletes. Obviously, there's some good shit going on there. But also, specifically, his athleticism from wrestling. And while that came with amazing takedowns that we'll talk about in a second, he came in with pretty good endurance, and even more importantly, in my opinion, was the willpower that I'm sure he also got from other things, but I'm aware that the grind that wrestlers have to go through give them some of the best willpower, I think, in the UFC and MMA in general. And the third thing that Jon brought into the octagon, which in my personal opinion is the single greatest thing about Jon Jones, and that's his creativity. Because I'll tell you one thing, while he came in to the UFC with amazing wrestling, amazing takedowns, his striking was not exactly great, but he used the few tools he had better than most fighters would have used those tools. And the last thing that Jon has, which more so comes in the form of something that he does outside of the octagon, I think that is a willingness and probably even a need to grow and learn and change as a fighter. And it seems to me that he not only focuses on closing all the holes in his game and making his weaknesses stronger, but he even will double down on his strengths. He was going to work on everything he had and everything he didn't have, and he was going to become great everywhere. Part of his creativity is just the opportunistic mindset that he has. Any little opening, pop, we're going for the takedown. His aggressiveness in the clinch is something that I love. From day one, Jon was super busy with the knees in the clinch, and then he'll switch it up and go to the face with the elbows. Man, those elbows, whether it's in the clinch or especially when it's on the ground and he's on top, he will mess your face up. He'll also go elbows to the body when he's got a dominant position. Just very opportunistic, because he can't cover up everything. He'll find the hole and he'll hit it. But even from the beginning, in his stand-up game, the way Jon used range, not only with his arms, but also the way he used his legs to keep people sort of near the edge of his punching range, because I'm gonna keep it real. I mean, his arms are almost as long as his legs. Jesus Christ, they're so goddamn long. And not only that, he was patient, again, being opportunistic. He wasn't just going in wild. And while his cardio wasn't amazing, even near the end of the second round of that first fight, you could see him getting tired, but his will, that wrestler's will to just push through, not to mention creativity, doesn't get tired. And that's one of the biggest things you just can't take away from him. And by his second and third fights, he really was already looking like he had an amateur kickboxing career before that, as opposed to someone who was a wrestler that switched over. His rate of growth seriously was amazing. And then he fought Matyushenko. So now 5 fights in to the UFC, and he goes against Vladimir Matyushenko. This guy's a veteran of 13 years. Mind you, when Jon had his first fight in the UFC, he'd only been fighting / training for 9 months. This guy is a veteran of 13 years, Belarus national wrestling champion. He had 24 MMA victories to that point and was on a 12-fight win streak. Jon had just turned 23. Vlad's 39. This was no joke. Everyone was talking about Jon Jones being a hot prospect. But this was the point where they were like, all right, he's really going to be tested. After 1 minute and 52 seconds, Vlad's on his back, getting his face elbowed into oblivion. TKO, Jon Jones victory. If there was any doubts that Jon Jones was a true contender to be reckoned with, there was no doubt anymore. Next fight against Ryan Bader was super phenomenal. In his Octagon interview afterwards, Joe Rogan tells him, hey, here's the situation. Rashad Evans was scheduled to face Shogun for the title. Rashad Evans is injured. He blew out his knee. The UFC wants to give you the opportunity against Shogun Hua for the light heavyweight championship of the world. And would you believe Jon took the opportunity? And he didn't just take the opportunity, he seized it and he owned it and he absolutely knocked it out of the park. The kid who came in at, I believe, 20 years old with the weird stand-up and amazing ground game, became a kickboxer, became a mixed martial artist, and at that time beat one of the very best. After this, the game now was not who can Jon Jones beat, but who can beat him. And this question would be asked over and over and over again. Quentin Rampage Jackson, tap from rear naked choke. Lyoto Machida got all the way choked out, standing up on his feet against the cage. Definitively won against Rashad Evans by unanimous decision. Then submitted Vitor Belfort. This is now in 2012, the single most experienced veteran of the UFC because he had been fighting since 1997. 15 years. And he submitted him. Then he goes up against Chael Sonnen, and everyone was saying Jon Jones had never faced a wrestler like this in his whole time in the UFC. Well, guess what Jon did? Jon out-wrestled Chael Sonnen and beat him up on the ground. And this is really when Jon starts making a habit of beating everyone at their own game. I mean, really, truly just saying, you're good at this, then I'm going to beat you in that game. At this point, Jon Jones was very quickly becoming both a household name and a prominent part of the GOAT conversation. Jon had not only become more versatile, having a huge arsenal of tools now with which he could be creative with, but he had become even more unpredictable, despite all eyes being on him and everyone studying him now and watching the tape and coming up with their own game plan. You just didn't know what you were going to get. When you stepped in the octagon with him, you just didn't know. He was dangerous everywhere and could beat everyone at their own game. But then came Gustafsson. September 21st, 2013. I don't think Jon Jones knew what he was going to get when he stepped into the octagon with Alexander Gustafsson. Because let me tell you, for the first 2 rounds, Jon 100% got outstruck. Those were easy 10-9s for Gustafsson. And I think this is the one other thing that I haven't touched on about Jon is that, and especially once he started fighting so much of his career in 5-round fights, he'll take the first round or 2 to figure out his opponent. And the longer you're in there with Jon, the longer he's going to figure out your timing, figure out what your favorite this is, favorite that, how you use the jab or how you are against the fence, how strong you are in that clinch. And as the 3rd round started, continued, and then ended, that was the turning point. You could see everything start to fall into place. As Jon figured out Gustafsson's timing, he'd see his cardio starting to go, and the tide just started to swing. He just started picking Alex apart, and more as the fight went on, 4th round, 5th round, until by the end of that 5th round, it's like, whew, man, Gustafsson's a warrior for hanging in there with Jon. But he was just getting picked apart and beat up. And when Jon was getting outstruck in those first 2 rounds, I mean, he ate some shots. And Jon proved on that night that he could face adversity And after that, it was hard to say that he wasn't a champion to stay. Daniel Cormier, Ovince St. Preux, Daniel Cormier again. Then his second fight against Alex, and he puts him away. TKO. Anthony Smith got beat up for 25 minutes. So again, decision victory, but absolutely dominant. And then we get to his most recent fight against Thiago Santos. Now, unfortunately, something happened to Thiago's left knee in that fight, but before his knee gave out on him with what looked like it might have been an ACL tear, because his bottom half of his leg just kept popping out and buckling. It was bad. I just watched that the other night, and man, Thiago, talk about a warrior. I mean, that leg was basically almost useless. But man, he was swinging that thing. But anyways, especially the whole first round. I mean, Jon got his legs beat up, and Jon has always had skinny legs, and to the point that it almost looks kind of silly. Especially his ankles are just, they're tiny. They're like twig-like. This man has no calves. And he kicks a fair bit, man. I mean, by the end of the fight, Jon had such a welt on the inside of his thigh, and his calf was all messed up, his left leg. But it also seemed like not for a moment did he misstep. Did it hurt him? I mean, Jon's willpower to push through adversity is very much an amazing skill in itself. Now, again, as the fight went on, Jon only got better. Jon got the reads. But after that fight, he himself said, he exposed the whole of my game, being those leg kicks, and people wanted to do those for a while. But Jon would shut down that game plan again with his creativity and pressure and all kinds of different things. But someone was able to do it and show it was possible. So he said he's going to close up the hole in the game. And where does that leave us now? Well, before we get to the last little bit of this podcast, I would like to introduce to you a new little segment that I want to do, which is called the Joe Rogan Moment of the Week. This Joe Rogan Moment of the Week is a little Jon that I found as I was doing research for this video. Let's just watch it.
I thought that in the Gustafsson fight. Look at this. He tried a scissor trip.
Oh, man. I don't know exactly what he was going to say, but obviously he said les, and then he said scissor. He was going to say that Jon was attempting a lesbian something or other. I don't know. I would really love to talk to Joe Rogan one day and figure out what the slang term for that move is. But wow, he was so close to saying it on air. And I remember as I was going through that video, I was like, it didn't hit me right when I heard it. It was about 5 seconds afterwards, and I was like, wait a second. And literally because of that clip, now we have the Joe Rogan Moment of the Week. So the Jon Jones of today, the Jon Jones of Saturday, the Jonny Bones Jones that will be fighting Dominic Reyes. Now, Dom is undefeated, and most of his fights, he's putting people away. But I think Jon's right when he says,
I don't think he knows what he's getting into.
I don't think he does. He doesn't know what he's getting into. Before doing the research for this video, I didn't realize what Jon was. And I really do think that's the GOAT so far. And this is coming from an Adesanya fan. And I do think in 2021, Adesanya will beat Jon Jones to become the true new GOAT. But that's a story for another video. Let's talk about Saturday. What does Dominic Reyes need to look out for? Well, one thing I see Jon do all the time, keep his opponent against the fence. This does lots of things, physically speaking, but I think mentally, even when he's not necessarily doing anything else, punching, kicking, whatever, you still feel pressured. Your back's against the fence. You're trying to circle away, but he's stalking you. Already, we're starting out with not just the physical game, but the mind game. But in terms of the physical game, he'll slowly chip away at his opponent's legs with leg kicks, which stops their forward advance. Again, chips away at the leg, so it's going to be hurting more and more as you go on through this 5-round fight, which is going to take away mobility, take away some of the power on the strikes. Jon gives so many different looks, whether it's coming at weird angles with a spinning something or other, or getting into the clinch and, elbows from all angles. He'll feint the takedown, come up with the elbow, just does really weird stuff, but it's awesome. He'll also use those little leg kicks and the jab to interrupt his opponent's flow, which I think he actually does better than a lot of people. Again, just mentally getting his opponent off his game, breaking that rhythm. It's such a little thing that makes makes a huge difference. He is super duper active in the clinch, maybe one of the most active clinch fighters in the game. So many knees to the body, which is going to tire Dominic out. Gotta watch those elbows coming from all over the place. If Dominic wants to get this done, he's going to have to do it early, in my opinion, because like I said before, Jon reads his opponent so well, knowing it's a 5-round fight. He'll take the first round or two to figure out Dominic's everything. I mean, the way that he really can learn everything about a fighter once he's in there, because you can watch all the tape in the world, but it's not until you're in the cage with that person that you really figure it out. But he does it better than anyone. The way that he reads and sort of like downloads the information in his brain and figures it out, and it's really something special. The leg kick option is probably gone for Dom. As Jon said, he's closing that hole in his game. So I think Dominic needs to really keep Jon guessing instead of being the one that's guessing, which is basically how every fight goes. No one's ever really able to get into a rhythm with him for all the reasons that I just mentioned. I think is the biggest thing. If Dominic can get into a rhythm where he's keeping Jon guessing and he can expose any little holes in Jon's defense, that's where this knockout that he said he wanted is going to come from. And he needs to be risky within reason, but to really put it to Jon. And I think he should also keep Jon backing up if he can. Not that Jon does terribly backing up or going against the fence, but he definitely doesn't do as good as he does when the tables are turned. Jon has proven that he can take shots, that he's got a chin, but he's still human. And if a couple of big shots don't do it, if Jon really does eat some of, or, you know, his actual best shots and he doesn't go down, I think that Dom is going to have to just chip away at him like Jon would do to many other people. But I think it's going to be about him being patient and picking his shots. And when he does pick those shots, to keep the power on it, maybe not go 100%, but keep the power on it, because little shots just aren't going to pick away at Jon. He just has too good of a chin and too much willpower for you to try to chip away at him with little or medium shots. He literally needs to be chipped away with fairly powerful shots. And lastly, I think in terms of grappling, when he is in the clinch with Jon, he's got to watch out for everything, but I think the best thing he can do is him not being the one against the fence. If he does get put against the fence, he's got to turn Jon around, or he needs to go for a takedown and get Jon on his back, which we've basically never seen. And that doesn't mean that Jon isn't good off his back just because we've never seen it. I doubt that he's spent his entire career now in the UFC not learning how to be good off his back. That's crazy. So while I think it's still much better, obviously, than having Jon on top, I think once Jon is on his back, especially with those long arms, Dominic has to be really careful about submission attempts. But I think that he needs to, if he can get Jon down, get in a dominant position, beat Jon down like Jon has beaten down other people. If Dom gets taken down, I think he needs to try to get back to his feet as quickly as possible. He needs to create frantic yet technical scrambles and try to either get up or get a dominant position. Dom can do all of this, which is no small order. I think Dom has a very good chance of winning this fight if he does all those things. I think Dominic has something very special about his mentality. He's part of this new wave of fighters. He's grown up watching Jon, but I don't think it's as definitive, as 100% certain as everyone says it is. That being said, I also thought Cowboy was going to have a way better shot against McGregor, and that only took 40 seconds. So I think this is either going to be a 5-round war, or it's going to end very quickly, or maybe something will happen in the middle. Who knows? I don't know, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hit the ding dong while you're down there, and let me know what you think about Dom, Jon. How do you think he should win? Just all that good stuff. Let's have an intelligent and informed conversation down in the comments. Let's build this community. Everyone talk to each other. I really want a involved and educated community. So thank you as always for all the support, for watching, listening, however you consume this, and I'll see you in the next one.